Gold sponsor, Montgomery Regional Airport. Silver sponsors, Alabama League of Municipalities, Alabama Municipal Electric Authority, Montgomery Area Association of Realtors, Power South Energy, Troy University, and I want to thank all of our corporate table sponsors with us today. We greatly appreciate all of your continued support. Let's give them all a round of applause. We would also like to give a special thank you to WSFA for being our media partner and broadcasting this event. We will air this afternoon in Montgomery and Mobile at 4 p.m. Thank you so much, WSFA. Let's give them a round. Okay, we now have a few housekeeping rules. Each candidate will have up to 4 minutes to introduce themselves and make opening comments. The countdown clock will begin on white, indicating the start of 3 minutes, and run as follows. 90 seconds remaining, blue. 30 seconds, green. 15 seconds will be yellow. 10 seconds, red. And time's up, red. At which time candidates must end their comments. There are a total of 11 questions. Candidates will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Countdown clock will begin on blue, indicating the start of 90 seconds, and run as follows. 30 seconds remaining, green. 15 seconds, yellow. 10 seconds, red. And time's up will be, again, red. Begins with the moderator when the moderator has questioned and acknowledged each candidate by name. We kindly ask all guests to silence their phones as we focus our attention on these candidates. Finally, I want to clarify that the questions our moderator, Martha Roby, will be asking today were not written by her. They were carefully prepared by the Montgomery Chamber to expand on the key topics discussed in this debate. Now I want to turn the floor over to our moderator, former Montgomery City Council member and former 10-year Congresswoman Martha Roby. Martha, will you and our candidates please take the stage, and we will flip the coin to determine which candidate will introduce themselves first. The other candidate will take the first question, go first with their closing statement. The candidates will alternate answering questions, and the candidates have not been made aware of the questions. Okay, let's go with the coin toss. Okay, this determines who's going to introduce themselves first. Are y'all ready? I'm going to have to flip it around. Caroleene. Okay. That means Caroleene. Got that.
It's quite the coin. Well, good morning. Hello, and thank you again for joining us. I had the distinct honor of serving the people of District 2 in the U.S. House for 10 years, and I now have the honor to help you get to know the candidates who want to fill that seat. I want to remind once more to please silence your phones. The questions I have for the candidates, again, were carefully thought out by the Montgomery Chamber of Commerce, but we will begin with opening statements. The coin has been flipped, and each candidate will get 4 minutes to speak. First up is Caroleene.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a privilege to be with you all today. I'm Caroleene Dobson, and as you know, I'm running to represent Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. I grew up in Beatrice, Alabama, Monroe County. I now live here in Montgomery with my husband, Bobby, and daughters, where I practice real estate law and serve on Alabama Forestry Commission. I am so proud to be raising my girls in South Alabama, where the values of hard work, humility, community, and faith are interwoven in the very fabric of our culture. But, like many of you, I'm worried about where our country is headed. I've never been in politics before. I'm a working mom, also probably like many of you, but I'm in this race because I want better. I'm running to make your life easier. I'm running to make gas and groceries affordable again. I'm running so that your kids can play in your neighborhood without you worrying about whether they get home safely or not. Over the course of this campaign, I have been committed to visiting a corner of this district to listen to you. Thank you to each and every one of you who shared your time with me, shared your stories, your hopes, and your fears. I'm running to fight for you and for all Alabama families. I'm running against a Washington, D.C. insider. He spent his entire adult career in Washington, D.C. He owns a $1.5 million house right outside Washington, D.C., started leasing an apartment in this district to run for this race. What's more, he has been part of an administration that, for the past 4 years, has crushed American opportunity and made our country less safe. He wants to continue the policies of the last 4 years. But you and I should ask ourselves, are we better off than we were 4 years ago? I've traveled all over this district and have yet to find one person who says yes. 4 years ago, gas was $2.20 a gallon. Eggs were $1.50 a dozen, and our world was not at war. We don't need more Washington insiders leading our gun. What we do need is leaders who will fight to be stewards of the blessings that God has given. People who understand the responsibility that we need this country as fruitful as possible and leave it better than we found it for the next generation. My opponent will go to Washington because Washington's his home. I want to make Washington work for Alabamians again because Alabama is and always will be my home. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th. Let me fight for you in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Now for the opening statement of Shomari.
Hey, good morning, and thank you to the Montgomery Chamber, and thank you to everyone here in attendance today, and thank you to the staff that is making this event. And Martha, Congresswoman, thank you for playing referee today. My name is Shomari Figures. I am born and raised in Mobile, Alabama. And more importantly, that is the hometown of a 17-year-old phenom named Ron Williams. Roll Tide. I was born here. I was raised here. I'm a product of public education. A product of public education. Like over 85% of people in this state and nearly 90% of people in this nation. I went to public school from kindergarten through law school. Finished high school, John L. LaFleur High School. I won a championship in basketball, by the way, 2002. I stayed in Alabama. I went to University of Alabama. Still stayed in Alabama. I went to University of Alabama's law school. I wasn't on the first thing out of here after high school. I didn't go to Harvard. I got my law degree here. But this is home. I followed my father's footsteps, who many of you knew. My father walked into the hallways of the University of Alabama School of Law in 1969 as the first black man to do so. He walked out in 1972 with a law degree as the first black to do so. That meant something to me. So I followed that path. My father went on and had a career across this state, made history, showing that we too belong here, that we do the things, that we can do everything if given an opportunity. My father died unexpectedly in 1996, 2 years ago. And my mother, who most of you know, ran for that state Senate seat and still holds it to this day. What I learned from my parents is this. We all have an obligation ourselves. How do you take what God has given you and put it to you for the benefit and the betterment of the community and the people and places that are responsible for you in the first place? For me, that is Alabama. That has always been Alabama. That's what led me on the career path that I've had. Some may call it being a Washington insider. But what I call it is being the product of a state that has a history needing government to force them to treat people right, of needing government to make sure that people have equal opportunities and equal access opportunities. That is what led me to a career that has taken me across federal government. Now, I don't agree with how federal government works in many respects, but I have learned how it works, and I know how we can make it work to benefit people of this district. I know how we can leverage that experience to improve outcomes here. I know how we can leverage that experience to make sure, like my father was able to take advantage of an opportunity previously been denied, that communities here are able to take advantage of having an opportunity of a member in Congress who actually cares to improve the conditions in their community. I look forward to discussing this with you guys throughout the rest of the morning. And it looks like I ran Martha off. I'm sorry.
Moderator just wanted to make sure I was getting the rules correct. So we'll start with our first question, and Shomari, you'll answer this question first.
Okay.
The situation in the Middle East appears to be escalating. Yesterday, Iran attacked Israel with approximately 180 missiles, and Israel is expected to respond. How should the United States respond to this situation? What strategies should be prioritized to ensure regional stability?
Yeah, so look, we begin with an acknowledgement. We are fast approaching the one-year anniversary of the attack that preempted this entire situation. Here we are 1 year later, and it appears to be escalating to another level. We have an obligation as a member to stand with our partners in Israel. They have been a strong partner, strong ally. They have been a source of democracy, a source of stability in the most region that the world has ever known. There is a mutually beneficial relationship. There is a strategic relationship between our countries that is necessary both to prevent harm here domestically as well as to maintain credibility, stability across the world. The United States must lead. We must be a leader. We must seek out diplomatic solutions to bring this conflict to an end as soon as we possibly can. And we can do that without violating our partners in Israel. And we can do that while making sure that we maintain place as a global leader and that sort of beacon of what the world can be, that sort of beacon of peace. I think we have to work with our partners. We have to work with our allies. We have to do everything we can in order to prevent this situation from further escalating. We do not want it in a situation where we have a broader conflict that expands to other nations. This country has seen that. This world has seen that before. So we must stand with our partners. We must provide them the resources they need to continue to defend themselves, and we continue to lead every way that we possibly can to limit this situation from escalating to a point where it runs the risk of putting boots on the ground of American soldiers.
Thank you. Caroleene.
Yes, we have a moral obligation as a nation founded on godly principles to stand with Israel. We also have a geopolitical interest in defending Israel. Israel is on the front lines of a greater war by those in the Middle East who would seek to destroy Israel and destroy America. And Alabamians have always recognized this. Many of you may not know that in 1943, the Alabama state legislature was the first throughout the country to unanimously approve of the nation state of Israel. Unfortunately, the action that we see by Iran can be directly linked to the Obama administration and the Biden administration's policies, which my opponent served. The flawed nuclear deal of the Obama administration appeased Iran, and then continually, after the October 7th attacks, the Biden-Harris administration has engaged in equivocation when it comes to support for Israel, including unfreezing billions of dollars for Iran to fund the very war that they are attacking right now on Israel. You can't trust an alum of the Obama-Biden administration to stand with Israel, and that's what we must do. We must stand with Israel. We must take a tough stance against Iran and the terrorist groups it support that seek to destroy America. And we also have to crack down on anti-Semitism throughout our country. It's evident that back in April, when Iran also launched missile attacks on Israel, that my opponent failed to make a statement supporting Israel. I will stand with Israel and ensure that we are protecting those of the Jewish faith there and here in America.
Thank you. Caroleene, what would you consider your biggest challenge for the district, and what could you do in Congress to combat it?
The biggest challenge in this district is the lack of opportunity. We have incredible race, we have wonderful people, but our economy is struggling. I don't have to tell you it's not hard for many Alabama families. It's almost impossible. 45% of Alabama families say that they struggle to pay weekly bills. About 31% of Alabamians with credit cards delinquency. We need relief, and we need that quickly. But relief, there's no silver bullet. We have got to stop inflation. That means we've got to stop reckless government spending that we've seen the Biden-Harris administration engage in, like $7 billion electric vehicle charging stations. That benefits about a handful of people in this district, people that don't have access to sewage. At the same time, we have got to unleash American energy independence. This administration has been crushing American energy, and that increased the cost of what it takes to grow things, move things, build things, and make things. Additionally, we have been failing in our education systems. We have got to ensure that our young people have access to the tools and are equipped with the knowledge that they need to have successful 21st century jobs in this district. We have young people that are dropping out of high school. Here in Montgomery, the truancy rate is about 25%. And at the same time, we don't have access to electricians. We have the opportunity for successful careers in this district for our young people, and I will fight to ensure that we do a better job of providing parents with choice, of ensuring our education dollars are going to students and teachers, not to Washington bureaucrats.
Thank you. Shomari.
There's identification of a lot of problems, but with no solutions. And we need people in Washington, D.C. that are actually going to fight to bring solutions. We're all finding what we don't like the best. But how do we fix it? One of the things that I don't like the best, and people across this district don't like the best, people across the state don't like the fact that we, as Alabamians, if you're born in this state, you're to die before anybody else born in any other state of the United States of America. With the exception of 2 states, we could all guess one: Mississippi and West Virginia. Why is that? Why do we live the shortest life in this country? It's healthcare. It's healthcare. It's insurance. It's being able to go to a doctor. I've been in this race now for almost a year, about 11 months. In 11 months, what we have seen is 4 hospitals in this district. 4. 4 hospitals closed in the district, in our rural parts of this district. We don't have hospitals that are standing. We have to keep them open. The solution is to Washington, pass the incentive for the state of Alabama to educate finally to provide health insurance for 350,000 people billionaires like my opponent, people who need government to stand up for them, to be able to get in front of a doctor. This is the greatest nation the world has ever known. There is no excuse we have hospitals closing. There's no excuse we should have wait an hour to get to a hospital in Macon County. There's news for it. And people are concerned about it because when you don't have hospitals, guess what you don't have? Businesses that want to be there, families that want to live there. So we have an obligation to fix this healthcare crisis in the state of Alabama, and that is an issue that is in every corner of this district that we visit.
Thank you. Shomari, and then Caroleene, what will be your top 3 priorities for District 2 if elected?
Just spoke of one of them. The thing that I will do day one is walk down the hall to Congresswoman Terry Sewell's office and co-sponsor the Medicaid expansion bill to again open up the reimbursement period, or the reimbursement incentives rather, for the state of Alabama to do what 40 plus others in America have already done, and that is expand health care here. Because if Medicaid had been expanded, that hospital in Union Springs would still be open, and Thomasville would still be open, Grove Hill still open, Monroe County's maternity ward would likely still be there. That's priority number one. Priority two is making sure that we continue to make the investments across this district, bring the jobs here to this district. Mobile was just recently the benefit of the largest infrastructure project, federal grant for an infrastructure project in the state's history, in the history of this state. That is a project that is going to change in Mobile. That is a project that is going to create jobs and economic opportunity, but it's also a project that would not have been there if Monat had been in Washington, because she would have joined every other Republican in the delegation who voted against the funding that is now coming to Mobile for that project. Even though they all were there to celebrate it, they all voted against it. So we in Washington that are going to fight for the infrastructure investments, that are going to fight for the infrastructure dollars. It takes money to do it, and we need it. We need it in this district. Healthcare, infrastructure investments. Third priority is making sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep our community safe, make sure we are making the smart investments on the front end, investments in public education, investment in community-based programs to support our mayor, support our local communities, to reduce the risk of children going up and being on a pathway that's likely going to end up on one side of a bad decision. We have to make our community safer, and we have to make a commitment to investing in the future of our communities.
Thank you. Caroleene.
Look, I'm not a Washington insider. I'll work with anyone and everyone to bring relief to the people of Alabama. First and foremost, we have got to get our economy back. We have got to curb inflation. We've got to create jobs. We've got government off our back. For hospitals to survive, for schools to flourish, we've got to have people in our rural communities, and they have got to be there because they've got to have jobs. And this administration, my opponent was part of, has been crushing American opportunity. They've been crushing American energy. They've been meeting regulations that have made it almost impossible for small businesses to continue to grow and flourish. Small business make up so much of this district. And so I will fight to ensure we get our economy running again. Secondly, part of the reason that we have a strain on so many of our local enemies is our border crisis. There's, without question, there is no dispute that our country has suffered due to the open border policies of the Biden-Harris administration. My opponent was part of Biden's transition team. He helped put policy in place. And whether it's the fentanyl crisis that impacted nearly every community in this district, or whether it's the 10 million non-taxpayers here who are seeking our social, who are putting strains on our rural health care facilities, have got to secure our border and come up with a meaningful solution to immigration. Related to that, third thing I would work on is the crime. We have witnessed an exponential crime throughout this district, including here in Montgomery. Part of that means coming up with better solutions for the mentally ill, also treating our law enforcement like the heroes they are and ensure they have adequate funding that they need. Thank you.
Caroleene, what would be your first and second committees of interest? Why and why? What committees would you seek to gain access to, and why?
This question is a little bit like a beauty pageant where you're supposed to answer world peace. And that, of course, I would be very good in an appropriation spot, because I could advocate for the people of Alabama, ensure that we funding that we need to create opportunities to repair infrastructure and to bring growth to this region. As a freshman congresswoman, the likelihood of that may be slim. So whether or not realistic, I would also very much be interested in serving on the Armed Forces Committee. This is so incredibly important to this district. Over half of Alabama's military assets are here in this district, many here in the Montgomery community. We have to fight to ensure that we are supporting Maxwell Air Force Base, the Air National Guard, the F-35. The Biden-Harris administration has been treating our military on social engineering instead of combat readiness, sending VA doctors to the border at the expense of our veterans and I will fight to ensure that we're not only just supporting the here in this district, but also the defense industry. Ensures that we can catch up to China. Right now, the Chinese Navy is larger than ours, and we hold the key in this district with Austal, Airbus, with Lockheed Martin and Troy to ensuring that we can catch up with our enemies and keep our country safe. So appropriations, armed services, but more than anything, I want to serve on the committees that would best serve the district. And so I'm open to serving on any and all committees that would allow me to be a voice for the people of this district.
Thank you.
Listen, we're going to make good whatever committee we get on because we have to. People here are relying. But in terms of committees that if I could have my pick where I would be, appropriate committee likewise would be right at the top to be able to steer investments here. But I understand being a freshman Congress that is a pipe dream and not likely to happen. But there is transportation and infrastructure. Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, they steer those infrastructure dollars that I've been talking about right back to the keys here. I know they were rebranded a little bit in the state of Alabama to call Rebuild Alabama, but those were Build Back Better dollars. Those were Build Back Better dollars that invested across the country, a lot of which was steered coming right out of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Those investments here. Montgomery needs those investments here. We need them in Mobile. We need them across every aspect of this district, from Phoenix City to Evergreen, from Greenville to. We have to make sure that we are investing in our future infrastructure because it improves our capacity for goods flow, in and outgoing. Right now down in Mobile, they have 3 major infrastructure projects going on. They are dredging out the port to make it a deep water container to increase capacity coming in, relocating the airport and getting an international to get more cargo coming in. And then also the bridge project that earlier, which would have regional impacts. Montgomery has an inland port. They also need support that we can actually bring those investments here. Ag Committee, Culture Committee, something that this state needs, something that this district needs desperately to ensure that our farmers and our rural communities have the resources they need and make sure that we're protecting those programs that are needed by too many in this district, too many people in this district that live below the poverty line. 7 out of the 15 poorest counties in this state are in this district. And so we have to be there to protect them, to increase the quality of life that we can. And lastly, I'd also say armed services. We have 5 military bases either in the district or in close enough proximity to this district where they impact what's going on, and we protect that industry.
Thank you. We have one last question before first break. We'll begin with Shomari. You've both already touched on this, but what would you propose to address the current healthcare challenges? Yeah,
so the first thing that we have to do, starting to feel like a broken record, is we have to go back and get Alabama to expand Medicaid. We have to. It is critically vital. It is no excuse that we have not done that in this state. We have the lowest life expectancy of age in the United States of America. In the state of Alabama, you are just barely to live past your 60s. Your 60s. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. And for people, that is because of lack of health care earlier in life. That is because they fall into this coverage gap where they have a job, work hard, but they realistically do not make enough money to be able to afford health insurance on the open market. But they make too much money to qualify for Medicaid. And so what does that result? It results in people going 10, 15, 20 years where the only doctor they see is an emergency room physician if they have an emergency. Well, that puts strains on our hospital. Ask Jackson Hospital about that right here in Montgomery. We need Medicaid expansion. We need to do that. And if the state of Alabama refuses that, then what we have to do is explore directing funding direct counties to at least be able to provide some of the preventative type services, because we know the issues that plague our communities, the issues that plague the counties and the people that live here in District 2 and across the state, these are conditions that are foreseeable. These are healthcare conditions like hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, needing dialysis, all things that if you have access to be able to go to a doctor for basic preventative care screening, basic work, basic urinalysis, you can see that you're headed down a pathway where we can make lifestyle changes and get you on a treatment course earlier, because one thing that we know in America, we spend the vast majority of our healthcare dollars on people who are over the age of 60. If we can make them healthier earlier in life, it will be cheaper, it will be a savings on the long term.
Thank you, Caroleene.
I grew up in Beatrice, and my mother spent her entire career supporting our family by being a physical therapist. She worked in rural Wilcox, Monroe, and Butler County. That's how I spent my childhood, going on home health care visits with her, working at her every summer. And I witnessed firsthand the vital that just one person can have in a rural community when it comes to help people heal from injuries, recover from surgeries. We have too few people like her in our rural community and small towns. And I will fight for funding for rural hospitals. I will fight to ensure that our rural hospitals would qualify for certain programs, like the hospital in Eufaula qualifies for critical access hospital designation and have that designation. So I will fight to ensure that our hospitals are getting the funding and qualifying for the programs that they need. We need to be honest in that the question of Medicaid expansion is one left to the states. And I encourage the governor and our state legislature to examine that, given the rural health care crisis that we have, the closure of the Thomasville Hospital this week, the fact that the hospitals in Crenshaw County and Conecuh County are also on the verge of closing. We cannot expect people to move rural America and take the jobs that we need to develop resources that we have in rural America if there isn't access to health care. But there's not just a silver bullet solution. Part of the rising healthcare costs are directly attributable to inflation that has been caused by this administration's reckless government spending and crushing of American energy independence. We also have to recognize that the best insurance is the one that you get through your job. So we need to create more jobs to allow people to have private insurance that are going to pay those reimbursements to keep our rural hospitals open.
Thank you. And does it for our first few questions for the candidates for Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. Stay with us. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Chamber of Commerce has organized this meeting between the candidates for U.S. House District 2, Republican Caroleene Dobson and Democrat Shomari Figures. Let's continue. Caroleene will answer this question first. Agriculture is a major industry in the district. What would be your priority?
Well, having grown up on a farm, I know firsthand the struggles that folks in our agriculture community are experiencing. I also know how vitally important food security is to the health of our country and the future of our next generation. We stand to lose about 100,000 small family farms this year. The reason for that is because of high inflation, of input costs rising, making it much harder for American family farmers to have any sort of economic benefit. You know, what most people don't realize that for the average Alabama family farm, over 90% of the assets are illiquid. That means most family farms are barely scraping by as it is. And this administration, I find it interesting that my opponent wants to serve on the Ag Committee when he's been part of an administration that has been over-regulating agriculture on every single front. The Biden administration has been trying to tell farmers what they can do with their water, how to raise their livestock, has been attacking farmers and the ability of farmers to flourish. I mean, just our small family farm operation, fertilizer costs have increased almost 150% in the last 3 years. This is directly related to this administration's policy with respect to American energy. Fertilizer is a byproduct of non-renewable resources, and the fact that we are not actively developing and expanding and optimizing American energy is causing the price of fertilizer and diesel to increase. So I will fight for deregulation, for unleashing American energy, and for supporting those who support us with food security.
Shomari.
Look, I think the theme continues a bit. Let's identify the problems with no actual solutions. But again, we need people in Washington that can do more than just problem spot. We have to be able to identify solutions. It starts with an understanding of our farming community. My father actually owned a small cattle ranch down in Theodore that we let go after he passed away. So it's not an industry that I'm completely unfamiliar with. I didn't grow up on a fifth-generation cattle ranch, but I certainly grew up in rural Alabama. My family comes from Clark County, so this is not an issue that is unique to us. So what we have seen is farming across the country, certainly farming across the state of Alabama and the district. This has been an industry that has been gradually declining for decades. President Biden didn't make this industry decline. It's been gradually declining for decades. We have seen for far too long the children of farmers, like my opponent, leave the farm, and they don't come back. They don't come back. And so this is not a Biden issue. President Biden was not the reason you decided not to continue the family business. What we have to do is make sure that our farmers, have access to capital. They need access to capital. That is a critical piece of the Farm Bill. We have to go to Washington and have to not continue to punt on the Farm Bill. There are too many provisions there for food security. There are too many provisions there to make sure that the industry can remain competitive, that limit the amount of products that we can import from other countries, to make sure that they remain a viable player in this industry. We also have to make sure that we're preparing our communities to be able to compete in the future of farming. Too many rural communities still don't have access to the internet, and if you're going to be able to compete in the future of farming, you must be able to incorporate the appropriate levels of technology to facilitate you being able to be in that business. And so we have to make an investment there to make sure that our farmers and that industry is protected and can compete beyond just now, but going into the future.
Thank you. We're now going to pivot to a couple of questions related to defense, and we'll start with you, Shomari. How should Congress allocate defense spending to enhance emerging capabilities like cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and missile defense to counter potential threats to our national security?
Look, we live in a technologically, very fast-paced technological environment, and the scope and the manner in which conflicts play out now are different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago. And so our capabilities, our defense capabilities, have to acknowledge that and have to incorporate that into how we are preparing, how we are making the investments. We have seen here over the last several years that cyber warfare is a real thing. It is something that we have to guard against, because through the internet we can have our most basic capabilities attacked and crippled in the form of our electrical grid, in the form of our banking systems, in the form of our water systems and other utility systems. So we have to make sure that we're making the appropriate level investments at every single level. We cannot take for granted. We cannot take for granted that even though we may have the best fighting force, that we do not need to make the advancements and the investments, the appropriate level investments into the future of what warfare unfortunately looks like. And so in Congress, I would make sure that we were being informed, make sure that we were taking a responsible approach to adapting to the modern nature of how conflict exists and how other countries are going to attack us and have attacked us. And so that is what we would do, and that's what we have to do, and appropriations must reflect that priority.
Thank you. Caroleene.
I'm the proud granddaughter of 2 World War II veterans. My grandfather was injured in Guadalcanal, was a Marine. My grandmother was in Army intelligence. She was one of the first 100 women sent to the South Pacific, having grown up in rural Holly Pond, Alabama, and North Alabama. I grew up with an appreciation for our service members. Right now, we're doing a disservice in that we're not providing them the technology and the equipment that they need to be competitive in this state of global cyber warfare. So I will fight for funding for cyber warfare, for artificial intelligence, to utilize that to make sure that our servicemen are as well equipped as possible to protect our country. But if you talk to any of our service members, that's only part of the problem. There's a huge morale issue. Last year, according to the Department of Defense's own website, the combined branches of the military missed their recruiting targets by 41,000 troops. Part of this is because we are not providing our servicemen and women with up-to-date technology and equipment. Again, this district provides a lot of opportunity for ensuring that we can catch up on that front. Another issue is that we're not treating our veterans with the respect they deserve and giving them access to the services that they need. We have 62,000 veterans in District 2 alone. Many of them have to travel out of state to get services, to seek treatment for just basic medical needs, and we have to do a better job of that. We also have to implement clear and simple rules of engagement. I was in Huntsville earlier this week, and anyone there will tell you, so many veterans will say that this administration is more concerned with socially engineering service members than making them combat ready. And I will fight to ensure that we're supporting our military on all fronts.
Thank you. Caroleene and then Shomari. What policies or initiatives do you propose to protect and defend our local military installations from potential downsizing or closure while ensuring their strategic importance and contribution to national defense?
Well, again, I think as we've seen with the attacks yesterday, our world is at war. Maxwell Air Force Base is one of the 5 pearls of the Air Force. It is vital to ensuring that our country is secure. The Air National Guard as well, the F-35 here, is so essential. I know a lot of us think National Guard and think, how long does that take to mobilize? An F-35 Air National Guard can be ready to go in 72 hours. And when it comes to China, the question is not if, but when. So Montgomery, this district, plays a vital role in protecting our national security and really protecting the free world. There are 2 ways to support Maxwell. One is to ensure that we are supporting our military, keeping it growing and thriving, continuing to support programs like the War College here. But in order to retain Maxwell here and help it flourish, we also have to make sure that this district is one that's attractive for military spouses. that there are opportunities for military children. That means that we have got to address the education crisis in this district and in this community. It means that we have got to create jobs. We've got to combat inflation. We have got to get our economy back on track, stop reckless government spending, and instead invest in solutions that are going to bring about change for this community. You know, when it comes to Maxwell Air Force Base, I know a lot of folks that are stationed here and don't bring their families. In order to continue the health of this base and our community, we have got to make sure that our service members have the highest quality of education for their children, that they have the choice in providing that, and that their spouses have good paying jobs right here in this district.
Thank you. Shomari?
I think the answer to that question starts with understanding the local communities in which the bases impact and how they are incorporated into our local economies. And so that starts with a very strong partnership at the state and local level. That starts with being able to sit down with Montgomery Mayor Stephen Reed and going over and sitting down with Phoenix City Mayor Eddie Lowe and getting an understanding from them. How can we leverage Congress? How can we leverage what we can do to further incorporate the impacts, the positive impacts that the bases can have? What are the problems you hear locally that the people on the base wish they had solutions to, that know that they could grow and become more vibrant in an even greater part of the community? I know here in Montgomery, for instance, Maxwell Gunner is a pillar of this community. We have to lose it. Montgomery cannot, we have to keep it. We cannot lose Maxwell Gunner. We cannot. There's too much from a national security perspective that's implicated here. There's too much from a local economy perspective here, that we have to go to Washington, D.C. and make sure that we're doing every single thing in our power to grow the influence of Maxwell Gunner. It is something that has impact beyond just Montgomery. It is regional. It is statewide. So therefore, in Washington, whether or not I'm fortunate or not enough to end up on Armed Services Committee, I will be the biggest advocate, the biggest cheerleader for working with the Department of Defense to see what are the new programs on the horizon, what are those programs that are currently being implemented and run out of other military bases where you are thinking of either expanding or relocating and would like to come to an environment that is used to actually facilitating that. I will be the biggest recruiter for that, to bring more of those instrumental programs, particularly those programs. We just talked about cyber warfare and the future of warfare, what it looks like. We have to make sure that Montgomery and Maxwell Gunner and this District 2, has a place, has a role in that future of what warfare looks like, and preparing this country and this state and this district to be prepared and be ready.
Shomari, would you participate in community-directed spending?
Absolutely. 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 Without doubt. And you can even take the new fancy label off of it, community-directed spending. It's earmarks. Absolutely, I would participate in earmarks because we need it, because this state has too often been left behind without it, because the communities that we have that make up the majority geographically of this district don't receive the benefits of it. Mayor Haygood in Tuskegee, they need things. Mayor Reed here in Montgomery, they need things. Eddie Lowe, they need things out in Phoenix City. We need things down in Mobile, right? We can't fix our hospitals in Union Springs and Monroe County if we do not take advantage of every single resource that we can to direct spending to our communities. They are far too important. So absolutely, I would be a leading proponent of it. It must be done ethically, it must be done responsibly, and it must be done for projects that have a legitimate public interest. We cannot allow it to be abused, but the state of Alabama falls far too short in the investments that need to be made in our communities. And so in Congress, I would be at the front lines, right after meeting with every single mayor, every single county commissioner, every single school board member, every single elected, to take what they need, to come up with a plan of action, to be able to take that back to Washington, D.C., and try to bring the funding home for that. The job of a congressman is relatively simple. You go to Washington and you bring home the resources. That is the name of the job. Power of appropriations. It's laid out in the Constitution. So we have to do it. I would be very serious about it. I would be very intentional about it. And I won't leave a dime on the table that can be spent in District 2.
Thank you. Caroleene, would you be willing to participate in community-directed spending?
Absolutely. I grew up in rural America. I know that we have very dire infrastructure needs. We have healthcare needs. And when it comes to state funding, a lot of our state funding goes north of Montgomery. I think in 2022, about 80% of state funding went north of Montgomery, entirely north of this district. So it's even more imperative that whoever represents this district is actively fighting for funding, but fighting for it in a smart way. We don't need to be throwing money recklessly at and allowing our federal government to throw money at policy initiatives. We need dollars that are going to make an impact in the lives of every family in this district. As I mentioned before, there are communities that don't have sewage. There are communities that don't have access to health care. Troy, Alabama desperately needs a new post office. And of course, we cannot ignore the significance of the Port of Mobile and the opportunities that it holds, obviously despite the longshoremen strike that we see going on right now. I will fight for funding for our big cities, for our rural communities, and for everywhere in between, because I know that there are some real tangible needs that with a bit of responsible spending, we can make an investment that opens doors to opportunities, jobs, and really the future of this district. But what we also have to recognize is that we have too few folks in Washington that are being good stewards of our funds. We have so many folks that are trying to fund their policy initiatives instead of bringing home dollars to where they can count the most. And as a product of rural Alabama, as someone who is raising my children here, I will fight for every dollar that will make a difference in the impact Alabama families.
Let's take one more break. We'll be right back with much more from the candidates for Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. We'll be back in a few minutes. On the ticket this November to represent Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. Today's event is brought to you by the Montgomery Area Chamber of Commerce as part of their Washington Brief series. Let's continue. Caroleene, we'll start with you and then Shomari. How would you work with lawmakers from the other side of the aisle to do what's best for your district to constituents?
Look, I'm not a Washington insider. I'm just a working mom, and I'll work with anyone and everyone to bring about positive solutions for the people of this district. That's what I do in my job. I'm a real estate lawyer, and so when I decided to run for office, there were some folks that said, "Oh, well, you're not a litigator. Why are you running for office?" Well, frankly, I think we need more negotiators in Washington, people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and come to the table, because there are so many issues that really shouldn't be partisan. There's so many issues like our border. We should all recognize the importance of a secure border. This administration has not, and because they haven't, we now have millions of non-taxpayers that are draining our resources. We now have fentanyl in all of our communities. 80 to 90% of fentanyl precursors are made in China. They cannot legally be imported into the United States, so they are coming directly across our southern border due to the open border policies of the Biden-Harris administration, and my opponent would be a rubber stamp for those policies. Additionally, we heard from Border Patrol earlier this week that there are hundreds of thousands of criminals who have come across our border. 13,000 folks that have been accused of murder have come across our border. Over 60,000 burglars. We've seen the rise of sex trafficking. My own godbrother here in Montgomery died of fentanyl overdose, and that fentanyl is directly coming across our border. So when it comes to the issue of our border, our economy, our military, we don't need more Washington insiders who are engaged in the gridlock that we've seen for the past decades. We need more folks who are real people, who are going to Washington to bring about real results for the people of this district.
Thank you, Shomari.
As a child, I remember hearing my father one day use the word statesman. And in my youthful ignorance, I guess, as a young kid, I didn't understand what it meant. Isn't everybody a statesman? Like, everybody's from a state. But as I got older, I understood what that meant. That meant you represent the interests of the people that are responsible for you being you in the first place, the people that call the same place as you home. You go to Washington, D.C., your job is to not be a congressman or a congresswoman. Your job is to not be a Democrat or a Republican. Your job is to not be a puppet for an administration. It's not meant to be just another pawn. Your job is to represent the people who sent you there. Your job is to represent the men, the women, the children, the retirees, the veterans, the workers. Your job is to represent the people of Alabama, the people of Montgomery, the people of Evergreen, the people of Greenville, the people of Burnt Corn, the people of Phoenix City. That is your job. And you work with whoever you must to do your job. And so how would I work across the aisle? I will work across the aisle as a citizen, as a man, as a child of Alabama that needs government to be there for them. Because that life expectancy in the state of Alabama, before it creeps up on somebody down in Evergreen because they don't have health care access, it doesn't first check in with whether or not you are a Democrat or a Republican. It is real. And so we have to do everything that we must in working across the aisle. And it's also something that I've done throughout my career. My opponent mentions the border. Well, I've been to the border as a staffer, not just for a photo op. I've worked with Republicans to craft legislation to put more resources in the hands of our CBP agents, and that actually became law. So these are issues and things that we must work across the border on, across the aisle on. But first and foremost, your job is to be a statesman and represent the people here.
Thank you. Shomari, District 2 will now include the state's capital, home to several military installations, numerous historically significant events, and 7 or 8 higher education institutions. How would you leverage Montgomery, one county of 13, in prioritizing district needs?
So I said it at the last opportunity we had to do this in the runoff. Montgomery's different. And I mean that because this is a place that America owes so much. There are 2 cities in this district that have a different level of historical significance to this country, Montgomery and Tuskegee. But since you asked a question about Montgomery, I'll focus on Montgomery. When the rest of the country, when the rest of this world, when they stood by and they were too scared, we might be lynched, we might be jailed, we might be beaten, we might lose our job, we might have our home blown up. It was the people of Montgomery that stood up and said, no, enough is enough. It was the people of Montgomery that led the greatest social movement that the world has ever seen. It was the people of Montgomery that made America look in the mirror and ask itself that question that Dr. King resonated with. It says, how do we make America be true to what it said on paper? That was Montgomery. Montgomery is the reason that we have seen many of the freedoms that we love to hold ourselves out as being symbolic for across the world. Montgomery is the reason that happened. Montgomery is something that you cannot quantify into words, what it meant to this nation, what it meant to this world. We have a collective obligation as a country to make sure Montgomery's status remains at the top and is put at the top, is placed at the top in terms of priorities and making sure that this community, that this city, that this county has the resources it needs to make it the most economically viable, to make it the most economically vibrant place that it can possibly be. Because Montgomery did that for this country. Montgomery was there for America, and America must be there for Montgomery. And I will be there in Congress to make sure that Washington does not forget that.
Thank you. Caroleene.
I'm proud to be raising my family here in Montgomery, and if I have the opportunity to represent the people of District 2, I will continue to raise my family here in Montgomery. I have a vested interest in ensuring that this community thrives and becomes all that it can be. I'm so grateful to the Chamber for all that it does to bring opportunity to this area. And whether it's Maxwell Gunner, whether it's the Air National Guard, whether it's the legacy of the Civil Rights Movement, whether it's the new Whitewater Park, we have to fight to ensure that this community is thriving. That means ensuring that we bring more businesses here, that we get our economy back on track, that we support the inland rail extension of the Port of Mobile. That will alleviate the need for about 250,000 18-wheelers from I-65. That is so vital to ensuring the continued growth and the intermodal capabilities of not just Montgomery, but the state. But when it comes to Montgomery, I will also fight for solutions to the education crisis that we have here and the rising crime. I will work with local and state leaders to ensure that we have the funding, but that we also have the policies that foster addressing these needs in our communities. We've all seen a rise of crime here in Montgomery. We have too much to offer the world to be counting the number of gunshots that we hear on a weekly basis. And I will fight to ensure that we're not only supporting the industry drivers, but that we are supporting every single family and ensuring that regardless of zip code in this city, that every young person and every child in this city has the opportunity to pursue a 21st century job to keep the city growing.
Thank you. That concludes our 2-minute answered questions. The candidates will now each have an opportunity to provide a 90-second statement on a variety of topics. And we'll begin with you, Caroleene, national security.
Look, national security is so incredibly vital, but it extends beyond just the strength of our military. As I've mentioned before, we have a crisis when it comes to troop levels. We have about the same number of troops now as we did in 1940, even though our population has doubled. There's also a morale issue, and we have to work to address these. We have to have strength in our commander-in-chief. We have to have confidence in who's at the helm. Unfortunately, the Biden-Harris administration has been projecting weakness. This is invited aggression from those that would seek to do our country and our allies harm, and that's evident in the attacks that happened yesterday. But national security isn't just about our military strength. It's also about our food security and ensuring that family farms can continue to grow and provide the resources that we need as a country. It's also about our energy security. The Biden-Harris administration has been crushing American energy. My opponent served as part of the Biden transition team. In the first 100 days in office, they stopped drilling on federal lands and they shut down the Keystone Pipeline. Just those two decisions have had enormous impact on our energy dominance in the world. And finally, our infrastructure is a matter of national security, and I will fight to ensure that we have the funding that we need so that we're not deferring maintenance on vital issues of security.
Shomari, national security.
Listen, a nation has no greater obligation than to protect the homeland, than to protect its national security interests. And it starts at the top. I agree. We have to have confidence in the leader at the top of the ticket. We have to have confidence in the president, the commander-in-chief. That's their number one priority, is to protect people here in the United States, here at home. We have to make sure we're not putting somebody in the White House that's literally insane. We have to make sure that we're not dealing with a volatile leader. We have to make sure that we're not putting somebody in the White House who caters to dictators, who admires people that are leading nations like Russia and North Korea. So I agree. So we certainly must do that, and we must prioritize it. Look, our military, as my opponent has alluded to, they failed to meet recruiting goals last year. But the underlying question is why? Over 70% of children, or the young men and women, 17 to 24, they're actually ineligible. They failed to meet the basic eligibility criteria. That is not a problem created by Joe Biden. That is a problem that has been generations in the making. And so we must do everything that we can to bolster that population. We must also be responsible in understanding that our national security interests, that the people who are going to go fight wars, if the United States of America ends up in a war, they come from communities like here in District 2. So our national security policies have to reflect that and have to have a true understanding of who actually will fight the wars for this nation.
Shomari, Social Security.
Got to protect it, 100%. We have to stand by it. Social Security program is something that too many families or a lot of families in this district and in this country rely on. Social Security has to keep up with inflation. It has to be something that is there to protect our seniors as they age, as they get older. It's something that they were told would be there for them. It was something that they were told would be there for them when they aged out. If they did the things that the country asked and expected of them, they've paid into a program. Right now, eligibility for Social Security is 67 years old. Why is that relevant? Because, as I've stated here in the state of Alabama, you're only expected to live to just past your 60s, 71, 72 years old. So we need to make sure that we are taking serious that healthcare access to make sure that people are around longer to reap the benefits of the program that they've paid into for 30, 40, 50, 60 years in some cases. And so we have to protect it. We can't afford cuts to it. We can't afford cuts masked through other language, such as looking how we can save costs overall with these programs. No, we weren't asking people to save their investments in Social Security while they were working. So we certainly shouldn't be asking them to change their expectations and what this program is going to put out for them, because too many families rely on it. Too many elderly citizens here in this state and in this district and around this country rely on it, and we need it to be there for them. We must make it sustainable, and we must make the changes and modifications that are necessary to make sure that it is a program that will be there going into the future.
Caroleene, Social Security.
I will fight tooth and nail to protect Social Security benefits for those who are on Social Security, for those that have been paying into the system for years, relying on this as a source of income during their golden years. Folks that have spent their lives giving back to their communities and working hard to make it better. What my opponent doesn't mention is that folks on the left, like him, have been fostering policies that threaten Social Security. And he mentions inflation. That means your Social Security dollars don't go as far. Inflation that's been caused by reckless government spending and crushing American energy policies of this administration. Another threat to Social Security is our open border policy. When we have 8 to 10 million non-taxpayers who've come here in the last 3.5 years, that puts a strain on our resources. There is a finite amount of money in Social Security, and when we have non-taxpayers that have just arrived here competing against folks in District 2 who've spent their entire lives working and contributing to Social Security, that's just not fair, and it's not right, and I will fight to secure our borders. Another issue is the fact that we are not doing enough to create jobs, to bring people into the workforce. This administration has not incentivized people to get back to work since COVID. Here in Alabama, we have a workforce participation rate of 57%. So when we have 43% of eligible workers who are not contributing to the Social Security system, then yes, we're going to have a problem. But I will fight for solutions across the board for Social Security.
Caroleene, border protection.
Well, as I just mentioned, immigration is an issue that has been killing opportunity in our country, killing our young people. Literally, 100,000 Americans died last year of fentanyl overdose. Fentanyl, again, as I mentioned, cannot legally be imported to the U.S., so it's coming across our southern border after it's been manufactured in China. It's also made our communities less safe. There are young people who have died in this district at the hands of illegal aliens who are drunk driving, who've been apprehended multiple times and just released. The policies of this administration are nonsensical when you look at the fact that we have to have secure borders in order to keep our country secure. And the solutions that have heretofore been offered by this administration don't do enough. They leave the borders open without any vetting process for the first few thousand immigrants who come across. I can guarantee you that the cartels will ensure that their drug runners are first in line. There have been over 300 members of ISIS that have been apprehended due to this open border policy. Those are the ones we've been able to catch. And more recently, this week, we've heard from the Border Patrol directly that we have hundreds of thousands of criminals that have come across our border. For the sake of our country, for the sake of our communities here in District 2, we have got to secure the border.
Shomari, border security,
Look,
protection, sorry.
Have to protect the border, and it has to be based on facts. It has to be based on actual facts and not fear, not efforts to drum up fear about lies and conspiracy theories. We have an obligation to protect our border. We must do it. We must make those investments. We must put more Border Patrol agents down at the border. I have family that is Border Patrol agents, so I don't just hear from them on TV. I hear from them over the phone. I hear from them through text messages. I know what they're facing. I've been down there. As a staffer, I have worked and drafted legislation that ended up resulting in more resources going down to the border. I've also been a part of bipartisan negotiations to bring those resources and bring those reform plans to fruition. And the most recent one of which I would say drafted by one of the most conservative senators in the United States, James Lankford out of Oklahoma, had a bipartisan border plan, drafted, ready to go. You know who tanked it? My opponent's idol, Donald Trump. He said no, because they'd rather run on a problem than work on a solution. And so we have to go to Washington, again, to find solutions, to work on solutions. So we must get them the resources that they need on the border. We must reform our asylum process. We must reform our legal pathways to entry into this country. And we must take serious that obligation. And we can do it, and we will do it.
You have 90 more seconds to discuss immigration reform.
Immigration reform. Look, as I just hit to it is a multifaceted issue. It is something that is challenging. It is something that we know everybody's been great at identifying the problem. But as I just mentioned, President Donald Trump is hell-bent on standing against the solutions, even solutions crafted and drafted by his own party. So we must reform our asylum program. We know that is a large part of the large numbers that we see at the border. But we also must recognize the facts. As I said, here are the facts. Here are the facts. We had less border encounters in the 8-year average of President Obama than we did in the 4-year term of Donald Trump. Why is that? We had smarter border policies that were rooted in fact, that were rooted in providing the necessary resources that we needed. So we have to reform it. We have to expand the legal pathways to entry to this country. We just have to. It makes sense to do. And so we can protect our border without sacrificing the foundational values of who America is, and we can do it. And my opponent mentions the border. But what she fails to mention about the border is that in her early legal career, she spent time in Texas actually selling millions of acres of our border state land in Texas to shadow companies owned by Mexican investors. And so that is something that we have to understand, that we have to understand the realities of it, that border protection does not just become an issue when you're not being paid to do it. So we have to make sure that we have smart border border protection policies, reforming our immigration system in a manner that actually makes sense and reflects the true values of this country.
Caroleene, immigration reform.
Well, first I want to clarify, I was a real estate attorney, and I helped a Mexican company that was fleeing from the cartel that moved here illegally buy some office buildings, so it wasn't quite millions of acres. But what I will say is that we do have a border crisis, and my opponent points to the Obama administration, but what he fails to mention is the Biden administration, of which he was part. He was part of the transition team that flung open our borders and has resulted in less safe communities and a strain on resources in our country. The Trump administration lost track of 1,400 minors at the border. You know, to me, that is unacceptable. Any child lost track of at the border is unacceptable. But the Biden administration, they've lost track of 320,000 children at the border. We have got to get our borders secure, and we have got to ensure that we are not continuing the humanitarian and national security crisis that was created by the Biden-Harris administration, again, of which my opponent was part. Meaningful immigration reform, though, also means that we have got to incentivize people to want to come here legally. There are a number of businesses, whether it's agriculture, construction, transportation, in this district that rely on migrant workers. And right now, that process is overly cumbersome. There are quotas on that process. So meaningful immigration reform also means that we need to reward those who want to come here.
Caroleene, government spending.
Look, you and I have to balance our budget, and that's becoming harder and harder to do in this economy because of rising inflation, because of crushing regulation. But our government doesn't seem to acknowledge that. We've got so many Washington insiders that are more concerned about funding Washington, are more concerned about paving their path to power than they are about empowering our communities. And the reality is that we're headed towards a financial cliff. To be clear, again, as I've said earlier, I will fight for funding for our health care, for our schools, for our infrastructure. We need funding in this district, but we also have to spend responsibly. This administration has been throwing money at reckless initiatives. Again, $7 billion for electric vehicle charging stations, of only about a dozen have been built, and which do not improve the quality of lives of folks here in this district. We are $35 trillion in debt. That's the equivalent of debt payments of billions of dollars a year. And if we have any hope of getting inflation curbed and of bringing about economic success and prosperity to our country, we have got to have folks that are willing to balance the budget.
Shomari, government spending.
Yeah, I get it, but I also want to clarify something because I think it's a very important point. Ms. Dobson said that land deal that she worked out for Mexican companies purchasing land over in our border state of Texas was somebody playing for the cartel. Well, the realities of it, look, this is land that was used to secure a $100 million portfolio loan. So that's one hell of an office building. And so I think the realities of it is that it was not that. The realities of it is that in the private sector, you were a real estate attorney and you helped secure a deal selling border land to shadow companies owned by Mexican investors, which is you know, that's your business in the private sector. But what we cannot do is now sit here and say that we have the solutions to secure our borderland when that is what we have spent our careers doing. Government spending is something that is important. It is very important. And again, it's something that we have to analyze through a lens of actual fact. And that border piece, that's not something that we just drummed up. That is literally laid out on my opponent's website as a career achievement. But we have to understand this. is that in the Trump administration, even removing COVID spending, he added almost $5 trillion to the American deficit. You know how much Joe Biden has done? About two. So we have to understand that we have an obligation to make our government spending responsible and effective, but we also have to address this through a lens of reality.
Shomari, would you support codifying Roe v. Wade federally?
Absolutely. I do not believe that it is the government's role to tell a woman what she can and cannot do with her body. I think it's pretty simple. If you don't believe in abortion, if you don't want an abortion, don't have one. But it is not the role of government and politicians to be telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. We have seen the results of irresponsible regulations and laws in this respect. Even something as basic as IVF, as being able to help families be able to create life themselves with the help of doctors and the help of science and the help of modern technology, has come into question and to doubt because of the laws that we've passed here in the state of Alabama, and something that they had to scramble to try to rectify and still didn't quite rectify it. And I don't think it stops there. I think what will be next is contraception coverage. I don't think that's an illogical assessment of what is likely to occur if this goes on. The fact of the matter is this: women are equipped to make those healthcare decisions for themselves. They don't need government, they don't need politicians, they don't need a president, they don't need Congress, they don't need a Senate to tell them what they can and cannot do with their own bodies. That is a decision that is personal, that is a decision that should be between them, their God, their family, in light of their own circumstances, to be able to make that own personal choice themselves. And so that is a decision that I 100% believe should be left to women.
Caroleene, would you support codifying Roe v. Wade federally?
The Supreme Court in the Dobbs decision ruled that abortion is an issue that is best left to the states, and I stand by that decision. I'm pro-life. I believe in exceptions to abortion for the cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother, but this is an issue that's best left to state legislatures to decide with compassion, consensus, and common sense. When it comes to the issue of IVF, though, we have seen Senator Britt here from Alabama propose legislation that on a national level would ensure access to IVF across the country, and we saw Democrats vote that down because they want to maintain this issue as a campaign rallying cry. I have friends and family who have utilized IVF, the God-given technology, to bring the miracle of life into this world. And I will be a fierce advocate for IVF. I would love to introduce legislation in the House that mirrors Senator Britt's to ensure that we can allow people to utilize this technology to grow their families. But again, the left is politicizing this issue, and what they don't want you to know is that they have a very extreme position when it comes to abortion. Kamala Harris was one of many Democrat senators, all but two, that voted against the Born Alive Act in 2019, which would have ensured that any baby born in a hospital is entitled to medical care. The Democrats don't want you to know that they're the extreme on this issue.
You actually have 90 more seconds to discuss IVF.
Well, perfect lead-in. I'm so grateful for Senator Britt's work on this issue, and I'm grateful for the state legislature for acting quickly in the wake of the Supreme Court decision here in Alabama to ensure access to IVF. But even in those ensuing weeks between the Supreme Court decision here and the action by the state legislature, there were countless women who were in the process of IVF, which is a very emotional, taxing, and expensive experience that were forced to wait or delay the process of trying to bring life into this earth. I think that we have to fight for, I know and I feel and I believe, and I will firmly fight for IVF IVF access across this country. And the fact that the bill brought by Senator Britt was defeated by Democrats just shows you that they're willing to sacrifice IVF on the altar of increasing the partisan polarization in our country. We've had enough of that. We need more folks who are just like you and me, working moms, who understand that we need results on this issue and so many others, and we don't need more partisan bickering.
Shomari.
I think what happened in the state of Alabama with IVF was unfortunate. It was sad. It cost a fair number of families an opportunity, at least at the time, to be able to have a family of their own, to have children of their own. But it resulted from this obsession with telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. And I believe, as I've said earlier, that is not the responsibility of government. That is a decision that should be left to women and their families and their own circle of advisors in making that tough choice. But we also have to analyze this policy through reality. I'm not extreme on this issue. I just believe that it's an issue that people should be able to make themselves. But to sit here and listen to people, including the presidential nominee on the Republican side, say that you can have an abortion after birth, that's called murder. It ain't true. It's a lie. It's already illegal. You cannot do that. And to also sit here and further a lie that women wait until 8 and 9 months pregnant to have an abortion. It's not true. It's not how it happens. They're making these tough decisions much earlier in that process. And so at the end of the day, I think we have an obligation to make sure that we're standing up for women to make their own decisions.
We will now begin our closing statements, and each candidate will have 4 minutes to close, and we will begin with you, Shomari.
Well, thank you again to the Montgomery Chamber. Thank you to the Renaissance Hotel for hosting us, the staff here, and all of you here in attendance. I think we have an opportunity here to put a leader in Washington that's going to go to Washington, D.C., and that's going to put the state and the district and the people here in first. I think it's been pretty clear on this stage who views things through a partisan first lens and who views things through a solutions-oriented lens. I don't have to go to Washington to learn how to be a Democrat. I don't need that education. I'm a Democrat because I believe in certain things. I believe in the power and necessity of supporting the least of these. I believe in government being there for people who need government to be there for them. I believe that government should have a role in taking care of those people who are poor, those people who don't have access to a doctor in their community, those people who live in communities where hospitals are shutting down, those people who live in communities where they don't have broadband internet access, those people who live in communities where they have to send their kids to school in buildings that were built with New Deal money in the 1940s. I believe that government should be there for those people. I believe that government has to be there for those communities, like Shorter, Alabama, that don't have the tax base to support the type of incentives that are necessary to be able to recruit in the types of companies that we want to provide those jobs of the future. I believe that we have an obligation to have representation in Washington, D.C. that will do that, that will go to Washington and fight for those infrastructure investments. I was down in Greenville, Alabama, met with their mayor. They got to tap into a new water supply source for the city of Greenville within the next 2 decades. I believe they should have the type of leader that doesn't just tell them, well, go talk to the state about that, getting water access. But that's the type of leadership we've had in Washington, D.C. for far too many parts of this district. We need a leader in Washington who is going to go to Washington to make sure that we are putting Alabama first. I'm not going there to fight with Republicans. I'm not going there, I don't care who's president, because my job description does not change regardless of who is the president, regardless of who controls the Senate or who controls the House. Because the healthcare challenges we face down here, they will still be here, whether it's a Republican-owned Senate or a Democratic-controlled House. The people that need the investments in their communities to build new roads, to build new bridges, to modernize their school systems, to make sure their hospitals can stay open. Those challenges don't disappear if Hakeem Jeffries is Speaker or if Mike Johnson is Speaker. And so we have to be willing to roll up our sleeves and put somebody in Washington, D.C. that understands that understands that this country was not built by Democrats or Republicans, that understands that our future will not be built that way either, that our future is going to be built by the people who roll up their sleeves, go to work, set aside partisan ideologies, and go to Alabama and go to Washington, D.C. with Alabama top of mind every single day. That is what motivated me to work in government in the first place, and that is what will motivate me every single day in representing the people of this state and of this district. I love this place. I wouldn't be anywhere other than here, be from anywhere other than here, because I know what we have come through as a state. I know what that history is. You know what that history is. We've come from slavery to where we are now. And we did it collectively. We did it together. We did it with fights here in Montgomery. We did it with prayer. We did it with belief that this state can be better than it was. And that is the mindset that I take with me. That is what drives me. That is what drove me to federal government in the first place, because I believe in the power of government doing good for people who need it most. And that is the attitude I will take with me as your congressman to Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Caroleene.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Sharon Rose, Anna Buckaloo, the Chamber, the staff here at the Renaissance. Thank you to the Chamber for all you do to bring opportunity to Montgomery, to shed light on the issues impacting our community. Thank you for your courage in fighting for this city. I want to thank WSFA for covering this event. Growing up in Beatrice, Alabama, I got 3 channels, and we started our day watching WSFA, and it's really special that my family starts our day the same way. I want to thank you, Martha, for moderating, for your years of public service. You are the epitome of a bipartisan stateswoman, of a devoted mother, and of a servant of Christ, and I'm grateful for your leadership and example. And I want to thank all of you here today and all of you watching. Thank you for taking the time to be informed about this election, to be informed about the opportunity that we have in Alabama's 2nd congressional district to have the chance not to just impact the future of this district, but the future of this country. For too long in this state, we've had districts that weren't competitive. This is a good thing. Everyone in this district in this election is going to have a voice. We've talked about issues that range the gamut, that impact everyone in this district. And again, for too long, we haven't had these discussions. What I want to do is fight for you in Washington, D.C. I grew up with the values of stewardship ingrained in me, the idea that we have a responsibility to utilize our resources and our opportunities that God has given us in the best way possible, cultivate those, and leave things better than we found them. And that's why I got in this race, not because I've ever been in politics, but because I understand that it's on us. The future of this country is on us, not just our resources and opportunities, not just our strength and security, but the future, the next generation is on us. It's important that we, and vital, that we instill in our children the values of hard work, humility, that we let them know that America, even though it is not perfect, even though we still have so much work to do, we still are the greatest force for good in this world, and that freedom is worth fighting for. You know, we don't need more Washington insiders, folks who live in Washington, like my opponent, who's kept his house in Washington, because they have politicized issues that should have never been partisan in the first place. We should all acknowledge that in order to have a prosperous economy, we need as many people as possible participating in the workforce, making our country better. That we need secure borders in order to protect our sovereignty and the health of our country. And especially in light of the attack yesterday, that we must resolutely stand up to evil and be strong to ensure peace. Over the course of the past 11 months, it has been my privilege, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you who have allowed me to share time with you. I'm fighting for the folks here in Montgomery, for those watching in Mobile, but also for those of you in Millry and Midway and everywhere in between. Please vote for me on November 5th, and let's together bring about a better future for Alabama.
Well, that wraps it up for us in this Washington briefing from the candidates for Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. We want to thank Democrat Shomari Figures and Republican Caroleene Dobson for their time. Remember to make your voice heard on November the 5th. If you missed any of this debate, you will be able to watch on WSFA.com and Fox10WALA.com in Mobile. Now I'll turn it back over to Karen Hughes with the Montgomery Area Chamber of Commerce.
Wow, what a great event. Thank you, Shomari. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Martha. Everybody did such a great job. I want to thank all of our sponsors again. Without you, we couldn't make this happen, so thank you so much. You know, the Chamber's mission is to not only take care of and support our businesses, but it's to take care of all of our residents here in our community. And by doing that, we want to keep them well-informed. So a well-informed community is a thriving community, and I think that we have accomplished that today. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day, and see you where you're.
Thank you.